Turn your Bibles to Exodus chapter 1 this evening. Exodus chapter 1. Exodus 1, I'm going to start reading in verse 8. It says, "Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick and in all manner of service. In the field all their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah, and the other Puah. And he said, When ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him, but if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and said to them, Why have ye done this thing, and saved the men children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty." We'll stop there for now. Let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Lord, I want to thank you for this opportunity we have to be able to open your word tonight, Lord. I do pray that you will help us to hear from you tonight, Lord. I pray that you will use this message, Lord. Help the distractions of everything that's going on not to take away from your word, Lord. I know that sitting at home watching on your phone or your tablet or your TV, or sitting in your car and listening to the service on the radio, there are plenty of distractions. There are all sorts of things that can take our focus off of what you have for us tonight, Lord. I pray that you will help us this evening to be able to focus on your word, Lord, and be able to hear from you tonight. I pray this in your name. Amen. I want to say this right off the bat. I know that Pastor preached out of this passage real recently, and even on a similar topic to what I'm going to be bringing this evening, but I planned, or have been planning, this message and this series long before I heard his message on this, and so I thought about skipping this, but I really think it's vital to the series and to what I'm trying to have us see through this. So some of it might sound like it's repetitive from what Pastor said. I was thinking about it. It's not that I'm copying what he said. It's that, as is often said, he and I think a whole lot alike. So some of what will be said this evening in the message sounds similar, but again, I still think very important for us to think about the scenario that we have here. Joseph, who we looked at Joseph last Wednesday night. Joseph has been promoted to a ruler in Egypt, and the famine was so bad that the Israelites moved to Egypt for food. And I think often we forget about that. I was talking to my mom about that earlier today. We often take the Bible and we view it as stories, and we separate the stories. So we see Joseph and the famine and the people moved there, end of story. And then we start a new story with the children of Israel in bondage. We separate that. We see them as two totally different things. At other times in the Bible, the children of Israel had been taken by force to a different place. Pastor mentioned the Babylonians, that they were taken by force. Remember, as we're going through this was by their choice. It was a way for them to survive. They chose to move to Egypt. And follow me here for just a second, and they chose to stay. The famine's over, long past. They could have, should have gone back. They chose to stay in Egypt. The bondage that was put on them, the taskmasters and all that, they didn't move to Egypt as slaves. This was by choice. They allowed it to happen. But they moved there so that they could survive the famine, which was a good thing while Joseph was alive. Joseph was high in command, and he had a name for himself, and these are his people, so they were treated well. But now he's gone, and even after Joseph had passed away, that was okay because he was still well known enough that things continued on okay. But worse now, the Pharaoh that knew Joseph is gone. So you've gone from we've moved here by our choice and things are pretty good to now the Egyptians don't remember that Israel's here by choice. And this new king, the new Pharaoh, realizes they're quickly being outnumbered by the Israelites, and while it's working out right now, his point of it is if at some point an army come against us and Israel decide, well, wait a minute, we're going to join this army that's against the Egyptians, they'll overtake us from the inside, just by pure numbers. Egypt would have had the trained soldiers. We see when Israel leaves, we see the army of the Egyptians. Egypt would have had the trained soldiers and the weapons, which the Israelites would not have had. But weapons only get you so far if you're outnumbered by too many. Having superior training only does so much when the numbers are so great. I like to wrestle around with my kids. It's a fun thing to do. We have to do it when my wife is gone. Because if she's there, the minute we start, she says someone's going to get hurt, and then they do. So we have to wait until sometimes she's at a ladies' thing or something like that. So we enjoy wrestling, and obviously, I'm a lot larger than my kids are. So if it's me against any one of them, I'll win hands down without a problem. Josh loves to wrestle. He tries hard, and one day it may not be this way, but as of right now, it doesn't matter how much he tries, he can't win. I don't know how much longer that's going to last, but if the others start joining in, it gets a little harder. At this point, I think I can still beat them all, but the older they get, the harder that becomes. And that's in essence what the Egyptians are fearing. It's in essence what they're fearing, that while we are better trained and we have better army, if the Israelites get too many of them, they're going to win just by overtaking us. So the king, the new Pharaoh, has his idea that we can stop them from having, or we can't stop them from having kids. What we can do is since they come to the midwives, have the midwives kill every male, and the Bible does tell us that they're Hebrew midwives, but they must have reported to the Pharaoh since he can pull them aside and give them this order. So he tells them, you're going to kill every male. There's just one major factor the king forgot about, and that is that Israel is God's people, and that God was with his people. God was with his people even when it may not have felt like it. Through this series, I've kind of pointed this out a few times because I think everyone can probably relate to those times where you feel like God isn't there. That's what's happening here in this passage. God is with the children of Israel, but this is a time where they wouldn't have felt like it. They're in another country where they were at one time favored because of Joseph, and now they're feared. They've come of their own free will, and now they've become slaves to the Egyptians and being told that their sons have to be killed. This would be another one of those times that you would have felt alone. You would have felt like God wasn't there But God was still there. God is with his people, even when it doesn't feel like it. And the same is true for us. Though there are times we feel alone, we aren't. We aren't. I don't know if you've ever spent much time thinking about that. I have. Knowing that no matter how alone I feel, God is right there beside me. God is with his people, even when they walk away from him. Again, the situation that we see Israel in, they've stopped serving God. They aren't spiritually where they ought to be. Rather than worshiping God, they've spent enough time now in Egypt that they've started to believe the lies of the Egyptian gods and started to worship them. They've walked away from God, but what's amazing is that God hasn't left them. And we see proof of that later on when they call out to God and they cry out to him, and he hears their cry. And more than just hearing their cry, when they cried, he already had Moses raised and prepared to deliver them. Though they were ignoring him for those years, he wasn't ignoring them and was preparing their deliverance. The same is true in our lives. There are times we make decisions and we make decisions that are choosing other things over God. Things that we choose to walk away from God in, messes that we get ourselves in, and we realize our mistake and that we need help to get out of it. God hasn't gone anywhere. He's still listening to our cry with a plan already in place. Now I say all of that to set the stage for our passage tonight. And I have three areas that we can see God, and I want to look at it through the life of Moses, through the birth and childhood of Moses. We're not going to get into any past that, but three areas that we can see God in the birth and childhood of Moses. The first is we can see God in the Egyptians. We looked at it in verse 16 and 17. I'll read them again. He said, when you do the office of the midwife to the Hebrew women and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him, but if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. Now the king's given a decree. This isn't exactly an optional thing for the midwives. It's not like the king pulled them in and said, now, I don't like what I'm seeing here, so if you feel comfortable with this idea, because, everyone's going to feel comfortable with this idea. If you feel comfortable with this idea, if it's a girl, it's fine. If it's a boy, take the baby out and kill it. That's not, but he doesn't give them an option. This is a decree from their king, but God. They give the king an excuse of the Israelite women being more lively than the Egyptian women, so they can't. But that's not what the problem is. The Bible makes it clear the midwives feared God. Again, remember, they're Hebrew women, but that answer to the Pharaoh. It's not as though it's just a matter of they like the Israelite women. Again, that's not where it's not where their allegiance would have lied. It had nothing to do with that. It didn't have to do with them just being tender-hearted. I read while studying for this, someone saying that it was because these women saw the babies and they just couldn't do it. You know how a baby does that. It doesn't matter how big and tough a person is, a baby melts you. I have a friend who was always, growing up and before kids of his own, was always one who wanted to have that kind of tough guy appearance about himself. I never wanted anyone to see a side of him other than being big and tough. And then his wife got pregnant and had a daughter, and that big tough guy went everywhere carrying this little pink bundle around with him and talking baby talk. A baby changes people. And there are some that try to claim that's what's happening here. That they intended to follow with the king's order, but then they saw the baby and had a change of heart. They just felt too bad. But that isn't what the Bible tells us. The Bible doesn't say they didn't do it because they liked the Israelite women. The Bible doesn't say that they didn't kill these babies because, well, they just had a tender heart. The Bible says that the problem was that they feared God. They didn't follow the king's order because they feared God more than they feared the Pharaoh. Because God was with his people. And God wasn't going to allow this to happen. So he used the midwives to spare the children. The first place we can see God in this passage is God in the Egyptians, God in his birth. The second place that we can see God in this passage is God in the river. I'm just gonna put it that way. God in the river. Look at chapter 1, verse 22, and we're going to read all the way through chapter 2, verse 4. It says, "And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, Every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive." So the midwives have failed. So he decides, okay, we're going to take it a step further. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, "Every son that is born ye shall cast in the river, every daughter ye shall save alive. And there went a man out of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi, and the woman conceived and bare a son. She saw him that he was a goodly child, and she hid him 3 months. When she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river brink, and she stood, and his sister stood afar off, to wit what would be done to him." King's plan hasn't worked. You think you have a foolproof plan. You have the midwives who are going to carry this out for you, and they won't. He had his plan, except for God. They feared God more than they feared the Pharaoh. So Pharaoh puts in place where he's come up with a new plan, and I can't help but read that and feel like it's awfully similar to right now. His plan is, I want everyone else to tattle on your neighbor. If they have a male child, you're to tattle and throw it in the river. That's his new plan. He can't let all these boys keep being born, or they're going to be outnumbered. But his first plan hasn't worked, so it's time for a new one. So the new the new plan is, he tells the Egyptians, when you see a baby boy, you throw him in the river, which is a terrible thing. I have long thought that one of the worst ways to die would be drowning. This concept that we're going to find the baby boy and we're going to throw him in the river. I've for a long time thought one of the worst ways to die would be drowning. My dad used to say, because he didn't want to be eaten by crabs, he didn't want to drown. I just don't like the idea of slowly dying. I mean, that just seems miserable to me. And I've had a couple of experiences that I thought I might drown. While studying for this, kind of thinking through that, it's been, quite a few years ago now, but back when Bo lived here, we one week decided we were going to take our families up to a glacier-fed lake way up in the mountains. It was beautiful, and we packed up our gear, including a raft so that we could paddle around and fish up there, and that was the plan. In the middle of the lake, there was an island with a high spot over some deep water. So I decided I was going to take a break from fishing so I could, cliff jumping, I guess, but it was only about 8 feet, so I'm not sure that's really cliff jumping, but jump from the island into the water. And I did it a few times, and the water, it's glacier-fed water. It was cold. It didn't matter how many times I did it. When you hit the water, it took your breath away every time. But I felt like I was getting used to it. I had done it, 8 or 10 times this month. I felt like I was getting used to it. The island to the shore was only about 40 or 50 feet, and I'm a pretty strong swimmer, so I thought, well, I should be fine. So I told Bo, I'm going to jump one more time. You start heading back to the shore. I'll swim over and meet you there. That was my plan. But it doesn't take long trying to swim in glacier water. Your muscles freeze up. I figured out real fast I couldn't keep swimming. Thankfully, I could still tread water, and Bo can paddle rubber raft pretty quick and pick me back up again, because I really thought I might drown. Drowning would be a terrible way to go. Again, any kind of slow death sounds miserable, but worse for a baby. If I had died drowning, it was because of my own stupidity. This is nothing of their own doing. They'd be completely helpless. That's exactly what's supposed to happen to Moses. But God. Moses was completely vulnerable. But God. Now think about a couple of factors that God played in this situation. The first being, Moses was born and they kept a baby quiet for 3 months.
Yeah.
I mean, just process that for a second. Lisa and I have 3 kids. There is no way a baby being quiet for 3 months can be explained as anything but a miracle from God. I mean, there's no other way you can explain that. When Zach was born, for the first year or so, I was convinced. You can ask Lisa. I told her this multiple times. I was convinced he hated me because if Lisa wasn't home, he immediately started crying. And I mean, the minute she walked out the door and cried until she came back in, and we aren't just talking a little cry. We're talking he would scream at the top of his lungs. And again, not only a few minutes. That's what we kept having people say. Oh, he's just going to cry for a few minutes, and he's a baby. He'll forget, and then he'll stop. Not him. He would scream until she came home. The entire time she was gone, it didn't matter if that meant if she was gone for 15 minutes or 3 days at a ladies' retreat. He screamed. Didn't matter if I tried to feed him, change him, no matter. He screamed until she walked in the door and immediately stopped. It was the most frustrating thing in the world. The point is, if a baby starts to cry and scream, there are times you cannot quiet them. Kaylee, as a baby, was terrified of men. If any man other than myself or my dad even looked at her, she cried and couldn't be calmed down until the guy that scared her was a long way away. But for 3 months, they were able to keep Moses quiet enough that no one knew. That was God. And I know I say with this point, I say it kind of a little bit jokingly, but any of you who have kids or have had kids know that for the first 3 months of their lives, all their lives, but for the first 3 months of their lives, they make a lot of noise. It was God. God was in the fact that the baby stayed in this ark. Babies squirm. I can't tell you the amount of times that I was holding or playing with one of my kids and they started to squirm and I almost dropped them. And every parent has had that the kid squirms and you're catching them before they hit the ground. That wouldn't have worked in this situation. Had Moses squirmed too much, he could have squirmed right out of this little ark that his mom made him. And I don't know exactly the construction of this thing. I don't know how structurally sound it was, how much time she and work she put into making it. I'm sure that knowing she was going to put her baby in it, she put every effort that she could into making it the best possible. But on the same token, I would think that a little boat made of weeds and mud would not be too hard for a kid to destroy. And then he'd be in real trouble. God was in Moses surviving. Now, think about where they are. The Bible doesn't tell us what river she put him in. But his mom didn't expect good things to happen. You look at verse 4. She's just set him in the river brink, and his sister stood afar off. Look what that says. To wit, what would be done to him. I have to think that means Mom says, I can't watch. Because she doesn't expect it to be good. Again, remember where they are. And I'm taking a little bit of license here, but they're in Egypt. There's a river in Egypt that has a crocodile named after it. The Nile crocodile? I have to imagine whether they were in that river or any other river, that there were some major dangers. Can you imagine what would have happened had one of those found this little mud and weed boat? I mean, as if a baby floating down a river by himself in a boat made of weeds and mud isn't bad enough. You're more than likely in an area that would have had crocodiles or any sort of other dangers. But Noah survived it all, not because of his mom's ability in constructing a little boat, not because of his sister who followed to watch, obviously not because of anything that 3-month-old baby Moses did. Moses survived the river because God was with him in the river. Because God protected him from any dangers that could have happened to him. God was with him. God was in his birth, and God was in the river. And then last night we can see God with the Pharaoh's daughter. Now, you start thinking about this entire scenario. Bear with me, I know, just follow me for a second. The odds of this working, if you are looking at, statistics and data, or if I were to go and I was saying science and data, but if you are looking at statistics and data, the odds of this working are slim to none. Again, I know that we know better than the odds of this, but bear with me. A child surviving floating down a crocodile-infested river in a little boat made of weeds and mud. And then, as if that wasn't enough, what a coincidence that it's the exact river at the exact time that Pharaoh's daughter was in the river. And wouldn't you know, she saw the ark and the Israelite baby inside and decided, I don't need to follow Dad's command and turn this ark over and let the boy die. No, instead, I'll bring him home to my dad's house and raise him as my own. There is no part of that doesn't work if it wasn't for God. It was God. It was God who brought the daughter of Pharaoh to the river at that exact moment. Again, I don't know what river it was. The passage doesn't tell us, but if that ark got caught in the current, the timing would have had to have been perfect. It wasn't by chance that she was there and came to the river at that moment, at this place. It wasn't by Moses' parents' plan either. I don't believe, I read someone today actually who proposed that his mom did this on purpose. And what he was proposing is that's what Moses' sister was watching. To wit, what would be done to him is because the parents planned this out. They knew Pharaoh's daughter was going to be here. I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that if they knew she would be there at that time, that they would have put him there. Because if they knew Pharaoh's daughter, the daughter of the one who wanted your son dead, was going to be there, you'd probably pick a different river. If you knew the child of the man who has said your son needs to die is going to be there, you're not going to say, hey, let's hope she's the one that finds him. No, you're going to go somewhere else. She was there at the same time as Moses, not by chance and not by Moses' parents' design, but by God's design. It was God who caused the daughter of Pharaoh to have compassion. We see that in chapter 2, verse 6. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept, and she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. She knew. She knew that this was one of those children that was ordered to be killed. There would have been no question that she knew what Dad wants her to do. And like the midwives, I don't believe it was just that she had a soft spot for babies, because verse 6 tells us that he wept, and everyone knows that when someone else's kid starts to cry, you look for the mom to give it back, not say, I want to take it to my home. I'm sort of kidding, but it's the truth. I love my kids. Being at an age, or being at this age and borrowing other people's babies for a short time, because then as soon as they cry, I can say, here, have your child back and make it stop. I don't believe she heard Moses cry and thought, oh, he's screaming, how cute, I want to bring him home. The point being, this was God. It was God who allowed Moses to be raised by his parents, and better yet, to be paid to be raised by his parents. But they put their baby in this little boat of weeds and mud, probably thinking he would die. Again, I can't help but think in verse 4 where it says, to wit what would be done to him. They put him in this probably thinking he would die. What else could possibly happen? What else could possibly, even if he doesn't get eaten or drowned, there isn't a lot of food for a 3-month-old to eat in a mud boat. Instead, they were still able to raise their child and be part of his life and still teach him about the God teach him about their God. This doesn't happen if it's not of God. It was God. It was God who caused the Pharaoh to allow this. Pharaoh has given the decree not that long ago that Hebrew males should be cast into the river. And now his daughter comes home saying, Dad, look what I got. Can I keep it? If she opened that little ark and knew, oh, this is a Hebrew child, I guarantee when she brought this baby home, Dad said, that's a Hebrew boy. And I know a part of that may have been, because it's hard for a dad to tell a daughter no. Lisa says all the time that she balances me out because I would tell Kaylee yes to just about everything she asked for. But this isn't just that Pharaoh can't tell his daughter no. This is God. All this comes back to the point of that God was with his people. God was with his people when Moses was born and the midwives didn't throw him in the river. And God was with Moses to keep him quiet for 3 months. And God was with Moses when his family had to put him in this little boat of twigs and mud and send him into the river. God was with Moses when Pharaoh's daughter found him. And here's what it all boils down to. And what I'm going to do as far as a conclusion this evening. God was with Moses in what I'm going to define as his most vulnerable moments. His most vulnerable moments, because you don't get a whole lot more vulnerable than what we've looked at tonight. But through all of it, when it was all out of Moses' control, and for that matter, out of his parents' control, God was there. And more than just there, watching, God was intervening. More than just there seeing what was happening, God was directing. I think of Hebrews 13:5, I'll never leave thee nor forsake thee. So it doesn't matter where you are, what you've done, what you're going through, God is there. When we first moved into our house, we had a neighbor kid that my kids were witnessing to, and I remember it reached a neat stage at one point that it was all new to him. He had never heard about Christ. He'd never heard about salvation. He never heard about anything Bible-related, so he had tons of questions. So it got to where anytime I came outside for anything, he came over to ask questions, which was fun. One day he started asking me how God can be here with me and across town at the same time. And I explained to him that God is omnipresent, which means that he is everywhere at the same time. So he's here, and he's across town, and he's in Russia, and he's in Africa, and he's everywhere all at once. And I think as adults, we kind of underplay that because we're used to it. We've heard it. But a kid's perspective was great because as I explained that to him, his response was, wow, so wherever I am, God is there too? Which is exactly what we need to see through this series. Wherever we are, whatever we are facing, God is there. we just need to learn to trust him. To be like the parents of Moses and put that baby in a twig and mud boat and give it to God. It was completely out of their control, and they had to rely on God. This may be unpopular opinion to some, but necessary. I believe, but necessary. Right now, we are in a time that is completely out of our control. A time where we just, doesn't matter what I try to do, I can't control it. This whole thing with the virus and the stay-at-home order and all that's going on is out of our control. And this is my observation, and honestly, it saddens me because I'm seeing a lot of Christians who are crying out to government. They're mad about the governor, and they're mad about the way it's handled, so they're crying about it to the government, and they cry about it to their forefathers and complaining that this isn't how our forefathers meant for it to be, and they're crying about it to their fellow man, and they cry about it to all sorts of people, but they're crying to the wrong things. It wouldn't have done any good had Moses' parents cried to the midwives and cried to Joseph, who's dead and gone, and cried to the Pharaoh. Wouldn't have done anything at all. All the Christians that are crying to their forefathers and their Constitution and their Bill of Rights to save them from this, we're crying to the wrong thing. We aren't going to get through this time that is out of our control or come out of this because our government or our Bill of Rights or our Constitution or our forefathers. I'm just going to be blunt about it. If that's where you're crying to the wrong place. Crying to our rights as an American can't rescue us. What we need is to cry to God. Crying out that I'm an American, you can't do this to me, isn't going to rescue us from this situation that's out of our control. What will is crying out to God. When did God send Moses to deliver the people? It wasn't when the people cried to their taskmasters or to Pharaoh. It was when they cried to God. Notice, before they cried to God, they cried to their taskmasters and Pharaoh. And what happened? It got worse. The more they cried, the more rigor they were forced. Until they cried to God. It's what we need. For Christians to cry out to God. We're in a time that is completely out of our control, but God is still there. God is still working. God still has a plan. Just like with Moses, God is still directing everything. I'm just going to put it this or end it this way, but Christian, it's time we cry out to Him. It's time that we realize where our help comes from. I've been reading in my personal devotions right now in Psalms, and I just today read Psalm 17, and over in Psalm 17, David talks about my help comes from the Lord. It's time we realize that's where my help comes from, and cry out to Him. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you will, Lord, help us to see, first of all, help us to see that even in times like this that are completely out of our control, that you're still in control. Or when we can't see how it's all going to work, you are still directing. Just like in the birth and raising of Moses, it seemed like it was out of control, but you were directing it all. Lord, help us to see that, Lord, and then help us to see that if we want to get out of this time of no control, that we need to cry to you. That it's not a matter of things are out of control, so I have to take control. No, it's the opposite. Things are out of control, so we need to give control to you. Praise in your name.